The morning sun filtered through the tall windows of Courtroom 4B in the Denver Family Court Building, casting long shadows across the polished wooden floors. Judge Catherine Morrison sat behind her elevated bench, her reading glasses perched on her nose as she reviewed the stack of custody cases scheduled for that Tuesday morning. At 53 years old, with 20 years on the bench, she'd seen almost everything the family court system could throw at her. Or so she thought. The courtroom was filling with the usual cast of characters: nervous parents, stone-faced attorneys, court reporters preparing their equipment, and the ever-present security personnel. Among them stood Officer Jake Martinez, a 12-year veteran of the Denver Police Department, and his partner Rex, a striking German shepherd with intelligent dark eyes and a coat that gleamed like polished mahogany under the fluorescent lights. Rex sat at perfect attention beside Officer Martinez, his presence commanding respect from everyone who passed by. Sarah Chen arrived just before 9 o'clock, her hands shaking as she pushed open the heavy courtroom doors. She was a petite woman of 31, with dark circles under her eyes that spoke of countless sleepless nights. In her arms, she carried her most precious burden, her 3-year-old daughter Emma. The little girl's face was buried in her mother's shoulder, her tiny body rigid with fear. Sarah had been dreading this day for weeks. The custody hearing that would determine whether she could keep her daughter safe, or whether the court would grant visitation rights to Emma's father, despite the protection order still in effect. Sarah's hands trembled as she made her way to the plaintiff's table, whispering soothing words to Emma that seemed to have no effect. "All rise," the bailiff announced, and Judge Morrison entered, her black robes flowing as she took her seat. The judge's sharp eyes scanned the courtroom with practiced efficiency, noting the tension in Sarah's shoulders, the expensive suits of the opposing counsel, and the small child clinging desperately to her mother. "Case number 2024 FM 3847, Chen versus Chen," the court clerk called out. Sarah stood shakily, attempting to set Emma down in the chair beside her, but the little girl's grip only tightened. Emma's eyes were squeezed shut, her breath coming in short, panicked gasps. Judge Morrison observed this with concern. She'd read the case file thoroughly the night before: domestic violence, police intervention, a traumatized child who had witnessed her father's arrest. The psychological evaluations painted a grim picture of a little girl trapped in silence, unable to process the violence she'd witnessed 6 months earlier. "Ms. Chen, please approach," Judge Morrison said gently, her voice softer than usual. Sarah stepped forward, Emma still wrapped around her like a frightened koala. The opposing attorney, a sharp-dressed man named Robert Davidson representing Emma's father's family, stood as well, his leather briefcase clicking open with practiced precision. "Your Honor," Davidson began, his voice smooth and confident, "my clients are deeply concerned about the child's welfare. As you can see, the girl is clearly distressed, and we have evidence suggesting that Ms. Chen has been unable to provide adequate mental health support." That's when it happened. Emma suddenly lifted her head from her mother's shoulder. Her red-rimmed eyes, still wet with tears, focused on something across the courtroom. Her body, which had been rigid with fear just moments ago, went completely still. Sarah felt the change immediately and looked down at her daughter in confusion and concern. Emma's gaze was locked on Rex. The police dog sat motionless near the side entrance, his official duties requiring him to maintain position during court proceedings. But Rex had noticed the child too. His ears, which had been alert and forward, shifted slightly. His dark eyes, trained to detect threats and contraband, were now focused entirely on the small, frightened human across the room. "Emma," Sarah whispered, shocked to see her daughter actually looking at something other than her shoulder or the floor. In 6 months, Emma had barely made eye contact with anyone, not her grandmother, not her therapists, not even her beloved preschool teacher. Before Sarah could react, before anyone could move or speak, Emma did something that would change the course of her life forever. She wriggled out of her mother's arms with a strength born of pure determination and dropped to the courtroom floor. "Emma, no." Sarah's voice cracked with panic as she reached for her daughter, but the little girl was already moving. Emma's small sneakers slapped against the polished floor as she ran, not away from the scary courtroom, not toward the exit, but straight toward the massive German Shepherd police dog. Every head in the courtroom turned. The court reporter's fingers froze over her keys. Attorney Davidson's mouth fell open mid-sentence. The bailiff took an instinctive step forward. Officer Martinez's hand moved toward Rex's collar, years of training kicking in. A child running at a police dog was a recipe for disaster, no matter how well trained the animal. But something made him pause. Rex hadn't moved. The dog sat perfectly still, his entire body language shifting in a way Martinez had never quite seen before. Sarah lunged forward, her heart hammering in her chest. Everyone in that courtroom knew Emma's history. The little girl who screamed at the sight of dogs, who had nightmares about barking, who trembled whenever they passed a pet on the street. Sarah's neighbor's golden retriever had accidentally knocked Emma over a year ago, and even before the trauma of the domestic violence, Emma had developed an intense fear of all canines. But now, impossibly, Emma was running straight toward a 70-pound police dog. "Stop!" Judge Morrison's voice rang out with unexpected authority, her hand raised high. The single word froze everyone in place, everyone except Emma, who came to a halt just 18 inches from Rex's face. The courtroom held its collective breath. Time seemed to suspend itself in that moment, as if the universe itself was waiting to see what would happen next between a broken 3-year-old girl and a police dog trained for combat and courage. The silence in courtroom 4B was absolute, broken only by the faint hum of the ventilation system, and Sarah Chen's ragged breathing as she stood frozen halfway across the floor. Her daughter Emma stood less than 2 feet from Rex, the massive German Shepherd who had helped bring down armed criminals and locate dangerous contraband throughout his 6 years of service. Officer Jake Martinez's fingers hovered inches from Rex's collar, every instinct screaming at him to intervene, yet something deeper, something born from 6 years of partnership with this remarkable dog, told him to wait. Rex's body language was unlike anything Martinez had witnessed in their countless hours of training and field work. The dog's muscles weren't tense for action or coiled for defense. Instead, Rex sat with an almost supernatural stillness, his intelligent eyes fixed on the small child before him with an intensity that seemed to transcend his training. Emma's chest rose and fell rapidly, her breath coming in small, frightened gasps. Her hands were clenched into tiny fists at her sides, and her whole body trembled like a leaf in a storm. Yet her eyes, those dark brown eyes that hadn't made direct contact with another living soul in 6 months, were locked onto Rex's face with unwavering focus. Judge Morrison remained standing, her hand still raised in that commanding gesture that had stopped the courtroom's chaos. In her 20 years on the bench, she developed an instinct for pivotal moments, those instances where a single decision could alter the trajectory of a life. This was one of those moments. She could feel it in her bones. Attorney Robert Davidson started to speak. "Your Honor, this is highly irregular." "Silence," Judge Morrison commanded, her voice low but absolute. Her eyes never left the child and the dog. She was watching something unfold that her legal training had never prepared her for, something that existed in the space between written law and human need. Rex's ears, which had been alert and forward, slowly softened and rotated slightly back, a subtle sign of gentleness in canine communication. His tail, normally held in a position of alert readiness, lowered incrementally until it rested against the polished courtroom floor. Martinez recognized these signs. Rex was making himself less threatening, responding to the child's fear with an instinctive compassion that seemed to bypass all his tactical training. Emma took a tiny step closer, then another. Her right hand began to rise slowly from her side, her small fingers uncurling with painful hesitation. The movement was achingly slow, as if she were fighting against every self-protective instinct her traumatized mind had built over the past 6 months. Sarah's hand flew to her mouth, stifling a sob. She recognized this gesture. This was how Emma used to reach for her grandmother's cat, back before everything fell apart, back when her daughter still trusted the world enough to seek comfort from it. Tears streamed down Sarah's face as she watched her broken little girl attempt to connect with another living being for the first time since that horrible night. The courtroom seemed to shrink to just this moment, this impossible, beautiful, terrifying moment. The court reporter found herself leaning forward in her seat, her professional detachment forgotten. The bailiff, a grandfather of 4, felt his throat tighten with unexpected emotion. Even Davidson, with all his courtroom polish and professional distance, found himself holding his breath. Emma's hand continued its journey through the air, moving toward Rex's broad, powerful head. The German Shepherd's dark eyes followed the movement with perfect tracking, but he remained motionless. Martinez could feel his own heart pounding. He'd seen Rex face down armed suspects without hesitation, but never had he seen his partner demonstrate such profound gentleness, such careful restraint. The little girl's fingers were now inches from Rex's snout. Her hand was shaking so badly that she had to steady her right wrist with her left hand, the way children do when learning to drink from a cup. The trembling spoke of her fear, but the persistence spoke of something stronger, a desperate need for connection, for something to trust in a world that had become terrifying and unpredictable. Then contact. Emma's small fingertips touched the top of Rex's nose, and the entire courtroom seemed to exhale as one. The German Shepherd's eyes softened even further, and with a movement so gentle it seemed choreographed by angels, Rex slowly lowered his massive head and pressed his wet nose into Emma's palm. The effect was instantaneous and miraculous. Emma's face, which had been locked in an expression of fear and determination, suddenly transformed. Her eyes widened with wonder rather than terror. Her mouth, which had been pressed into a thin line of anxiety, parted slightly in surprise. And then, as Rex's warm breath tickled her palm and his soft fur pressed against her skin, something impossible happened. Emma smiled. It was a small smile, tentative and fragile as a soap bubble, but it was real. It was the first genuine expression of joy that Sarah had seen on her daughter's face since the night 6 months ago when police officers had burst through their door and dragged Emma's father away in handcuffs, while he screamed threats and curses. "Oh my God," Sarah whispered, her voice breaking. "Oh my God, she's smiling." The smile grew slightly wider as Emma's other hand joined the first, both small palms now cupping Rex's face with increasing confidence. The dog remained perfectly still, allowing himself to be touched, examined, explored by this tiny human who clearly needed him in ways that had nothing to do with police work or public safety. Officer Martinez felt moisture gathering in his eyes and didn't bother to hide it. In a decade of law enforcement, he'd seen Rex be brave, fierce, loyal, and unwavering. But he'd never seen his partner be this tender, this intuitively responsive to another being's emotional needs. Emma's fingers moved from Rex's nose to his ears, gently exploring the soft fur there. And then she did something that made Judge Morrison's decision crystallize with absolute clarity. Emma leaned forward, wrapped her small arms around Rex's thick neck, and buried her face in his fur. The German Shepherd, 70 pounds of trained police dog, sat absolutely still and let her hold him. His tail began to move, not the alert wag of a working dog, but the slow, gentle sweep of a companion offering comfort. It brushed against the floor with a soft whisper of sound that seemed, in that moment, like the sweetest music any of them had ever heard. Judge Morrison slowly lowered her hand and sat down in her chair, her mind already racing through possibilities that existed far outside the normal boundaries of family law. She looked at Rex and Emma, still locked in their embrace, and knew that she was witnessing something that would require her to be more than just a judge today. She would need to be an advocate for healing, even if it meant breaking every rule in the book. Time seemed to exist in a different dimension as Emma held onto Rex's neck, her tiny frame pressed against the German Shepherd's powerful body. The courtroom, usually a place of rigid procedure and formal protocol, had transformed into something else entirely, a space where healing mattered more than schedules, where a child's breakthrough outweighed legal arguments. Sarah Chen stood motionless, her hands clasped together in front of her heart as if in prayer. Tears continued to stream down her face, but these were different from the tears she'd cried over the past 6 months. These weren't tears of despair or exhaustion or fear. These were tears of hope, fragile and precious as morning dew, but real nonetheless. Officer Martinez knelt slowly beside his partner, his movement careful and deliberate so as not to startle Emma. He'd been Rex's handler since the dog was 18 months old, fresh out of initial training and eager to prove himself. They'd been through academy training together, countless calls, dangerous situations, and routine patrols. Martinez thought he knew everything about Rex, every signal, every response pattern, every behavioral quirk. But this was new territory for both of them. "Good boy," Martinez whispered to Rex, his voice thick with emotion. "Such a good boy." Rex's dark eyes shifted briefly to meet his handler's gaze, and Martinez could have sworn he saw understanding there, a recognition that this moment was important in ways their usual work never was. The dog's tail continued its gentle sweeping motion, and Martinez noticed that Rex had adjusted his position slightly, settling his weight more solidly on his haunches to provide a more stable support for the little girl clinging to him. Emma's grip on Rex's fur remained tight, but gradually her breathing began to slow. The rapid, panicked gasps that had characterized her arrival in the courtroom gave way to deeper, more regular breaths. Her small shoulders, which had been hunched up near her ears with tension, began to lower incrementally. Judge Morrison watched this transformation with the keen observation skills she'd honed over 2 decades of evaluating human behavior. She'd read countless psychological reports in her career, sat through hundreds of expert testimonies about childhood trauma and attachment disorders. She'd seen recommendations for therapy approaches, medication protocols, and behavioral interventions, but she'd never seen anything quite like what was unfolding before her eyes. The judge glanced down at the case file open on her bench. The psychological evaluation of Emma Chen was heartbreaking in its clinical detachment. Subject exhibits severe symptoms of post-traumatic stress disorder, minimal verbal communication, resistant to therapeutic interventions, night terrors occurring 5-6 times per week, exhibits hypervigilance and extreme startle response, prognosis guarded without intensive intervention. Judge Morrison looked back at Emma, who was now gently stroking Rex's ears with a tenderness that belied her 3 years of age. The disconnect between the traumatized child described in those reports and the little girl finding comfort in a police dog's presence was profound. Attorney Robert Davidson cleared his throat carefully, his earlier confidence visibly shaken. He'd come to court that morning with a carefully constructed argument about Sarah Chen's inability to provide adequate care for her traumatized daughter. He had documentation of missed therapy appointments, though his briefing conveniently glossed over the fact that Sarah had missed them because she was working double shifts at the diner to pay for said therapy. He had statements from Emma's paternal grandparents about the child's withdrawn behavior and lack of progress, though they failed to mention their son's violent history that had necessitated the protection order. But watching this scene unfold, Davidson found his prepared arguments turning to ash in his mind. He was a father himself, and despite years of professional detachment, he couldn't ignore the significance of what he was witnessing. Sarah finally found the strength to move. She approached slowly, her steps careful and measured, afraid that any sudden movement might shatter this fragile moment. She knelt beside Emma, close enough to touch but giving her daughter space to maintain her connection with Rex. "Emma, sweetie," Sarah's voice was barely above a whisper. "Can you hear Mommy?" For 6 months, Emma had refused to make eye contact with her mother during their worst moments. The trauma had driven a wedge between them, not through any lack of love, but through the chaotic rewiring of a child's brain trying to process the incomprehensible. Sarah had held her daughter through countless nightmares, had sung lullabies that went unheard, had whispered reassurances that seemed to evaporate before reaching Emma's consciousness. But now, something different happened. Emma lifted her head from Rex's fur and turned to look at her mother. Their eyes met, truly met, for the first time in what felt like an eternity. And then Emma did something that made Sarah's heart stop and restart in the same breath. She spoke. "Mommy," Emma whispered, her voice rusty from disuse but unmistakably clear. "Nice doggy." The words were simple, the vocabulary of a toddler, but their impact was seismic. Sarah's hand flew to her mouth again as a sob of joy broke free. Those were the first words Emma had spoken voluntarily in 6 months. Not words prompted by therapists, not words coaxed out during therapy sessions, not even the automatic responses to direct questions that occasionally emerged. These were spontaneous, genuine, self-initiated words. "Yes, baby," Sarah managed to choke out. "Very nice doggy." Emma's attention returned to Rex, but now she was smiling more broadly, her confidence growing with each passing second. She patted Rex's head with more enthusiasm, and the dog's tail wagging increased in tempo, matching the little girl's growing excitement. "Nice doggy helps Emma," the little girl announced, her voice gaining strength. She looked back at her mother, and Sarah saw something in her daughter's eyes that had been absent for so long: clarity, presence, connection to the moment and to her surroundings. Judge Morrison felt her own throat constrict with emotion. She'd presided over thousands of cases involving children, custody battles, abuse cases, neglect proceedings. She'd seen children testify, watched them interact with parents and guardians, observed them in supervised visitations. But she'd never witnessed such an immediate and profound response to any intervention. The judge's mind was already racing ahead, considering possibilities and implications. Traditional therapy had failed to reach Emma. Medications had been discussed but not yet implemented due to her young age. Play therapy, art therapy, even specialized trauma-focused cognitive behavioral therapy adapted for young children. Nothing had broken through the walls Emma had built around herself. But a police dog had achieved in mere minutes what months of professional intervention had not. Officer Martinez caught Judge Morrison's eye, and she saw in his expression a mirror of her own thoughts. This wasn't just a touching moment to be acknowledged and then filed away in memory. This was a doorway, a possibility, a chance for real healing. The question was whether the legal system, with all its rules, procedures, and protocols, could be flexible enough to walk through that doorway. Emma released her grip on Rex's neck and sat back on her heels, looking up at the massive dog with pure adoration. "Emma's friend," she declared with the absolute certainty only a 3-year-old could muster. Rex responded by gently licking the top of Emma's head, his enormous tongue leaving her dark hair slightly damp and sticking up in amusing directions. For the first time in 6 months, Emma giggled, a sound so pure and joyful that it seemed to cleanse the very air of the courtroom. Judge Morrison made her decision. She didn't know yet exactly how she would implement it, didn't know what obstacles she might face or what precedents she might be breaking. But she knew with absolute certainty that she couldn't let this moment pass without acting on it. This child had just shown her the path to healing, and Catherine Morrison would be damned if she didn't do everything in her power to ensure Emma could walk that path. The judge picked up her gavel, the weight of it familiar in her hand, but she didn't strike it. Instead, she set it down gently and leaned forward, her voice carrying clearly through the hushed courtroom. "I'm calling a recess," she announced. "Officer Martinez, Ms. Chen, please join me in my chambers immediately. Bailiff, please ensure that Rex is comfortable while we speak." As the adults began to move, Emma looked up at Rex one more time and whispered, "Don't go, doggy." Rex, as if understanding perfectly, settled more comfortably on the floor and remained exactly where he was. Judge Morrison's chambers were a stark contrast to the formal courtroom, lined with law books, yes, but also dotted with family photos and a collection of children's drawings from cases where she'd helped secure better outcomes for vulnerable kids. She gestured for Sarah Chen and Officer Martinez to sit in the comfortable chairs across from her desk, while she remained standing, her mind already working through the complexities of what she was about to propose. Sarah perched on the edge of her seat, twisting a tissue in her hands. Through the door, they could still hear Emma's delighted laughter as the bailiff and court reporter entertained her while staying close to Rex. The sound of her daughter's joy was so foreign, so unexpected, that Sarah kept glancing toward the door as if to confirm it was real. "Ms. Chen," Judge Morrison began, her tone gentler than her courtroom voice, "I need you to tell me everything. Not the sanitized version for legal proceedings, not the carefully worded statements your pro bono attorney helped you prepare. I need the whole truth about what Emma has been through and what you've been fighting against these past 6 months." Sarah's composure, which had been barely holding together, finally crumbled. The words poured out of her like water from a broken dam, 6 months of fear and frustration and desperate hope spilling across Judge Morrison's chambers. "It started 2 years ago," Sarah began, her voice shaking. "Mark, my ex-husband, he changed after he lost his job at the construction company. He started drinking more, staying out late. I thought it was just stress, you know. I thought if I was patient, if I was supportive, things would get better." She paused, wiping her eyes with the shredded tissue. Officer Martinez sat quietly, his presence solid and reassuring, a reminder that law enforcement could also mean protection. But they didn't get better, they got worse. The drinking became constant. He'd come home angry, looking for fights over nothing, dinner being too cold, Emma being too loud, me working too many hours. I started making excuses, covering bruises. My mother begged me to leave, but I kept thinking about Emma, about keeping our family together. Judge Morrison had heard variations of this story countless times, but she never let herself become numb to it. Each story was unique in its details, universal in its tragedy. That night, the night that changed everything, Mark had been drinking since noon. I could smell it on him when he came home. Emma was in the living room playing with her dolls, singing to herself the way 3-year-olds do. She was so happy, Your Honor. She was this bright, bubbly little girl who loved everyone and everything. Sarah's voice broke on those last words, and she took a moment to compose herself. Through the door, they heard Emma ask Rex if he wanted to hear a story, her small voice animated in a way Sarah hadn't heard in half a year. "Mark started yelling at me about bills, about money, about how I wasn't contributing enough even though I was working 50-hour weeks at the diner. I tried to calm him down, tried to get Emma out of the room, but he grabbed my arm. Hard. Emma saw it and started crying, which made him angrier. He shoved me into the wall and I hit my head on the corner of our wedding photo frame. The glass shattered." Officer Martinez shifted slightly in his seat. He'd responded to hundreds of domestic violence calls, had seen the aftermath of what Sarah was describing, but hearing it from the victim's perspective never got easier. Emma was screaming, "Don't hurt mommy, don't hurt mommy," and she ran at Mark, trying to push him away with her little hands. He raised his hand to her, "Your Honor. My baby was standing there and my husband, the man who'd held her the day she was born, who taught her to walk, he was going to hit her." Sarah's whole body was shaking now. "That's when I called 911. I grabbed the phone while Mark was yelling and I screamed our address to the operator. Mark heard me and went crazy. He smashed things, punched holes in the walls, threw furniture. Emma hid in her closet and I could hear her sobbing, but I couldn't get to her because Mark was blocking the hallway." Judge Morrison's jaw tightened. She'd read the police report, had seen the photos of Sarah's injuries and the destroyed apartment, but hearing the human story behind the clinical documentation made it visceral and immediate. The police arrived within 8 minutes. It felt like hours. They had to physically restrain Mark, and he was screaming the whole time, making threats, saying he'd kill me, that I'd never keep Emma from him, that he'd destroy us both. And Emma heard all of it from her hiding spot. When the officers finally got him out of the apartment, I found her in the closet, curled up so small, just silent. She hasn't been the same since. Sarah looked directly at Judge Morrison, her eyes red but fierce with a mother's protective love. That's when the silence started. Emma stopped talking except for 1 or 2 word answers when directly asked questions. She stopped sleeping through the night. She'd wake up screaming 4, 5, 6 times every night. She stopped playing with other kids at daycare. She'd flinch at loud noises, freeze up when she heard men's voices, panic in crowds. "What interventions have you tried?" Judge Morrison asked, though she'd read the case file. She wanted to hear it from Sarah directly. "Everything I could afford and some things I couldn't," Sarah replied with bitter exhaustion. "We started with Dr. Rebecca Martinez at the Children's Trauma Center, no relation," she added with a small nod toward Officer Martinez. "Twice a week for 3 months. Emma wouldn't engage. She'd sit in the therapy room and stare at the wall. Dr. Martinez tried play therapy, art therapy, sand tray therapy. Nothing worked." Sarah pulled out a folder she'd been clutching, spreading papers across Judge Morrison's desk. "These are the bills. 42 therapy sessions at $150 each, even with the sliding scale. I picked up every extra shift I could get. My mom helped when she could, but she's on a fixed income. I maxed out my credit card paying for it." Officer Martinez leaned forward to look at the documentation, his expression growing more troubled with each page he scanned. The financial burden on this single mother was staggering. "Then there were the specialists," Sarah continued. "A pediatric psychiatrist wanted to start Emma on anti-anxiety medication, but she's only 3 years old. The side effects, the long-term impacts, I couldn't make myself do it. Maybe that makes me a bad mother, I don't know, but she's so little." "That doesn't make you a bad mother," Judge Morrison said firmly. "It makes you a cautious one. What else?" "We tried a different therapist, Dr. Chen, again no relation, who specializes in early childhood PTSD. Same result. Emma would sit there, completely withdrawn. She tried exposure therapy for Emma's fear of dogs, thinking if we could address one trauma, it might help with others. We went to a therapy dog facility 3 times. Each time, Emma had a complete meltdown, screaming, hyperventilating, so terrified she vomited." The irony of that statement hung in the air, given what had just transpired in the courtroom with Rex. "And then Mark's parents got involved." Sarah's voice took on a harder edge. "Robert and Patricia Davidson, yes, that Davidson," she gestured toward the door, referring to the attorney. "Their son is in jail awaiting trial, facing felony assault charges, and they've somehow convinced themselves that I'm the problem, that if they had custody of Emma, they could fix her." "What's their argument?" Judge Morrison asked, though she'd read their petition. "That I'm not providing adequate care because Emma isn't improving, that my work schedule is too demanding, that I can't afford proper treatment, that Emma needs stability and resources that they can provide. They have money, Your Honor. Robert Davidson Sr. owns 3 car dealerships. They have a big house, connections to the best child psychologists in the state, the ability to hire full-time nannies." Sarah's voice rose with desperation. "But they raised Mark. They made excuses for his behavior his whole life. When he got arrested for bar fights in college, they paid for lawyers. When he lost jobs for showing up drunk, they blamed his bosses. They've never once admitted that their son has a problem, and now they want to take my daughter and tell her that what she saw, what she experienced, wasn't really her father's fault." Judge Morrison could see the complete picture now. A mother fighting not just for custody, but for her daughter's right to heal without gaslighting, for truth to be acknowledged rather than papered over with money and excuses. "Ms. Chen, in your opinion, why do you think Emma responded to Rex the way she did?" the judge asked. Sarah was quiet for a moment, considering. I think, I think Emma has been so scared for so long that she forgot what safe feels like. Every person she sees could potentially hurt her in her mind. Every loud noise could be the start of violence. Every interaction is a threat, but Rex, he's not trying to make her talk or feel better or process her trauma. He's just there, solid and calm and honest. Dogs don't lie, Your Honor. They don't have hidden agendas. Maybe Emma could feel that. Officer Martinez spoke for the first time since entering the chambers. Your Honor, if I may. Judge Morrison nodded. Rex is trained in what we call victim services. It's a specialized certification beyond his narcotics and patrol work. He's been to children's advocacy centers, worked with kids who have witnessed crimes, been present during forensic interviews with young victims. He's naturally gentle with children, almost intuitive about their needs. What happened out there in your courtroom? I've seen glimpses of it before, but never this pronounced, never this immediate. The officer's voice carried the weight of experience and genuine care. That little girl found something in my partner that months of therapy couldn't provide. I don't know the science behind it, but I know what I saw. Emma felt safe enough to come out of her shell, even if just for a few minutes. And in my experience, that's where all healing has to start, with feeling safe. Judge Morrison walked to her window, looking out over downtown Denver. Somewhere in this city were rules, precedents, protocols for how family court was supposed to work. But nowhere in those rules was there a provision for what she was considering, allowing a police dog to become part of a child's therapeutic treatment plan, incorporating an armed officer and his K-9 partner into a custody case resolution. Yet as she turned back to face Sarah Chen and Officer Martinez, she knew she was going to do exactly that. Officer Martinez, she said decisively, I need to know everything about Rex's training, his temperament, and whether the Denver Police Department would support his involvement in an unconventional therapeutic intervention. Hope flickered in Sarah's eyes for the first time in months. And outside in the courtroom, Emma's laughter rang out again, the sound of a little girl rediscovering joy with the help of a very good dog. Officer Jake Martinez sat up straighter in his chair, clearly not expecting Judge Morrison's question to lead where it seemed to be heading. He'd been a police officer long enough to know that the legal system rarely bent its rules, especially not in ways that involved active-duty K-9 units. But there was something in the judge's expression, a determined set to her jaw, a spark in her eyes, that suggested she was prepared to challenge conventional wisdom. Your Honor, Martinez began carefully, Rex has been certified through the National Police Canine Association for narcotics detection, patrol work, and as of 8 months ago, victim services. The victim services certification is relatively new for our department. Denver PD is one of only 12 departments in Colorado participating in the pilot program. Judge Morrison leaned forward, her elbows on her desk. Tell me exactly what that certification entails. Martinez pulled out his phone, scrolling to find the official documentation. The program was developed in partnership with the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children and several child psychology organizations. It trains K-9 officers to work in sensitive environments, children's advocacy centers, forensic interview suites, court waiting rooms. The dogs learn specialized behaviors beyond their normal tactical training. He showed the judge his screen, displaying Rex's certification. They're trained to remain calm in emotionally charged situations, to respond to distressed individuals with gentleness rather than their typical alert posture, and to provide what the psychologists call non-judgmental presence. Basically, the dogs become a calming influence in situations where children have to discuss traumatic events. Sarah listened intently, her hope growing with each word. This wasn't just a random moment of connection. There was actual science and training behind what had happened in the courtroom. Rex has worked at the Children's Advocacy Center on 12 separate occasions, Martinez continued. He's been present during forensic interviews with children who have been abused or who have witnessed violence. The feedback from the child psychologists has been exceptional. They say having Rex in the room reduces children's anxiety levels significantly, helps them feel safe enough to communicate. Judge Morrison nodded slowly, her legal mind already constructing the framework for what she was about to propose. Have any of these interactions led to ongoing therapeutic relationships, or are they typically one-time interventions? Mostly one time, Martinez admitted. We're a working police unit, Your Honor. Rex and I have regular patrol duties, investigations, searches. The victim services work happens when we're specifically called in for a case, usually for a single interview or court appearance. But would ongoing therapeutic involvement be possible? The judge pressed. If the department approved it, if scheduling could be arranged. Martinez hesitated, understanding now exactly where this was heading. Theoretically, yes, but Your Honor, I'd need department approval, probably from the chief himself. This would be unprecedented. Using an active K-9 unit as part of a custody case resolution and therapeutic treatment plan, I don't think anything like that has ever been done. Then we'll be the first, Judge Morrison said with finality. She picked up her phone and dialed a number from memory. Chief Patterson, please. This is Judge Catherine Morrison from Family Court. Yes, I'll hold. Sarah's hands trembled as she watched the judge work. This powerful woman, who held Emma's future in her hands, was about to go to bat for them in a way Sarah had never dared to hope for. While they waited, Judge Morrison turned to Sarah. Ms. Chen, I need you to understand something. What I'm about to propose is going to be controversial. The Davidson family's attorney will likely object strenuously. There will be questions about precedent, about the appropriateness of involving law enforcement in family court matters, about whether this constitutes proper therapeutic intervention. I don't care, Sarah said immediately, then caught herself. I'm sorry, Your Honor, I didn't mean. Judge Morrison held up a hand, a slight smile playing at her lips. Don't apologize for fighting for your daughter, but you need to be prepared. This could get complicated. The phone clicked as someone picked up. Chief Patterson, Catherine Morrison. I apologize for calling directly, but I have an urgent matter that requires your immediate attention, and it involves one of your K-9 units. She paused, listening. Yes, Officer Martinez and his partner Rex. They're in my chambers right now, actually. Judge Morrison put the phone on speaker. Chief Patterson's gruff voice filled the room. Judge Morrison, Jake Martinez is one of my best officers and Rex is the star of our K-9 program. What's this about? The judge explained the situation concisely. Emma's trauma, her response to Rex, the potential for an unconventional therapeutic intervention. She spoke with the precision of someone who'd spent decades making legal arguments, but there was also passion in her voice, a recognition that they were discussing a little girl's chance at healing. Chief Patterson was quiet for a long moment after she finished. Judge, you're asking me to assign an active-duty police dog and his handler to what amounts to therapy sessions for a civilian child involved in a custody case. Do you understand the liability issues, the resource allocation concerns, the fact that we're already stretched thin with our K-9 program? I understand completely, Chief. I also understand that the Denver Police Department's mission statement includes a commitment to community service and victim support. This child is a victim of domestic violence. She witnessed her father's arrest by your officers. In a very real sense, your department is already involved in this case. Martinez watched his boss navigate this conversation with impressed admiration. She was good, very good. Furthermore, Judge Morrison continued, the positive publicity from a successful intervention like this could be significant. The Victim Services K-9 program is still in its pilot phase, correct? Demonstrating measurable success in helping a traumatized child could help secure funding, expand the program, even serve as a model for other departments. Chief Patterson chuckled dryly. You're playing politics with me, Judge. I'm playing chess, Chief. And right now, everyone can win. Emma gets help, your program gets validation, Officer Martinez and Rex get to do work that clearly matters to them, and the city gets proof that innovative community policing makes a real difference. Sarah held her breath. Everything hinged on this conversation. "Let me talk to Martinez," Chief Patterson said. "Jake, you there?" "Yes, sir," Martinez responded, his voice professional but carrying an undertone of emotion. "You think Rex can handle this? And more importantly, do you want to handle this? This would be above and beyond your normal duties. It would mean coordination with therapists, scheduled sessions on top of your regular patrol work, probably some overtime that I'm not sure I can pay you for." Martinez glanced at Sarah, then toward the courtroom door where Emma's voice could still be heard chatting with Rex. He thought about all the calls he'd responded to over the years, the domestic violence situations, the scared children, the broken families. Most of the time, he arrived too late to do anything but document the damage and arrest the perpetrators. This was a chance to actually help repair what violence had broken. "Sir, when I became a cop, it was because I wanted to help people. Most days, the help I provide comes at the end of a leash tracking a suspect or finding contraband. But what happened in that courtroom today, that was a different kind of help. That little girl has been to multiple therapists and nothing worked. She spent 5 minutes with Rex and she smiled, she spoke, she laughed." Martinez's voice grew stronger. "Yes, sir, I want to do this. Rex wants to do this. I can feel it." Another long pause from Chief Patterson. Sarah could hear papers shuffling on the other end of the line. "Judge Morrison, if I approve this, and that's still a big if, I need guarantees. Written protocols, liability waivers, coordination with licensed therapists who take primary responsibility for treatment. Martinez and Rex can't be the sole therapeutic intervention. They need to be part of a comprehensive treatment plan overseen by qualified mental health professionals." "Absolutely agreed," Judge Morrison said immediately. "I'll be requiring exactly that. Officer Martinez and Rex would be supplemental to traditional therapy, not a replacement for it. And this needs to be time-limited. I can't commit an officer and a K-9 unit indefinitely. What are we talking, a few weeks? A couple months?" Judge Morrison considered. "I'm thinking a 60-day trial period with weekly sessions, possibly twice weekly depending on the therapist's recommendation. At the end of 60 days, we reconvene in court to assess Emma's progress and determine next steps." "Officer Martinez, you understand this is voluntary?" Chief Patterson asked. "I'm not ordering you to do this. If you say no, there's no negative consequences for your career." "I understand, sir, and I'm saying yes." Chief Patterson sighed deeply, the sound of a man making a decision he suspected would generate paperwork and headaches but knowing it was the right thing to do. "All right. You have my provisional approval, contingent on all the safeguards Judge Morrison mentioned. Get me a written proposal by end of day tomorrow. I want to see the treatment plan, the therapist's credentials, the session schedule, everything. And Judge, this stays out of the media until we know it's working. The last thing I need is reporters asking why I'm using police resources for therapy sessions if this doesn't pan out." "Agreed," Judge Morrison said. "Thank you, Chief. I know this isn't conventional." "Nothing about policing is conventional anymore, Judge. We're supposed to be warriors, social workers, and therapists all rolled into one. Might as well add facilitator of child therapy to the list." But there was warmth in his voice beneath the gruffness. "Take care of my officer and my dog, you hear. They're good people, both of them." The call ended, and the 3 adults in the chambers sat in momentary silence, processing what had just happened. Sarah finally found her voice. "Did that really just happen? Did you really just get approval for Rex to help Emma?" Judge Morrison stood, smoothing her robes. "That was the easy part, Ms. Chen. Now I need to find a therapist willing to participate in this unconventional treatment plan, convince them to take Emma's case, coordinate schedules, and oh yes, go back into that courtroom and explain to Attorney Davidson why I'm continuing this case for 60 days with court-ordered animal-assisted therapy." Martinez grinned. I almost feel sorry for Davidson." "Don't," Judge Morrison said with a slight smile. "He's being paid very well to object to everything I'm about to propose. Now, let's go make some legal history." As they stood to return to the courtroom, Sarah grabbed Judge Morrison's hand. "Thank you. Thank you for seeing my daughter, for really seeing her." Judge Morrison squeezed back. "Every child deserves to be seen, Ms. Chen. Now let's make sure Emma gets the help she needs." They opened the door to find Emma sitting cross-legged beside Rex, reading him a picture book the bailiff had found. The little girl looked up as they entered, her face bright. "Mommy, Rex likes stories." It was time to make this miracle official. Judge Morrison strode back into courtroom 4B with the bearing of someone who had just made a decision that would either become a landmark case study in family law or a cautionary tale about judicial overreach. She honestly didn't care which. What mattered was the little girl still sitting beside Rex, now showing him a picture of a cartoon dog in her book, and explaining with complete seriousness that the book dog was not as nice as you. Attorney Robert Davidson rose from his seat, his expensive suit crisp despite the emotional upheaval of the past hour. His expression was carefully neutral, but Judge Morrison could see the calculation behind his eyes. He was already formulating objections, preparing arguments about proper procedure and therapeutic protocols. "Your Honor," Davidson began as soon as the judge took her seat, "while the display we witnessed earlier was certainly touching, I must object to any delay in these proceedings. My clients have been waiting months for resolution, and the child's lack of progress in therapy actually supports our position that Ms. Chen is unable to provide adequate." "Mr. Davidson," Judge Morrison interrupted, her voice carrying the weight of absolute authority, "I'm going to stop you right there. What we witnessed today was not merely touching. It was the first genuine breakthrough this child has experienced since the traumatic event that brought us all here, and I will not ignore that breakthrough simply to maintain an arbitrary court schedule." She looked down at her notes, then back up at the attorney. "I am ordering a 60-day continuance in this custody matter. During that time, Emma Chen will be enrolled in a comprehensive therapeutic program that will include traditional trauma-focused therapy, supplemented by animal-assisted intervention with Officer Martinez and his K-9 partner Rex." The courtroom erupted in murmurs. Davidson's face flushed. "Your Honor, with all due respect, this is highly irregular. There's no precedent for involving law enforcement animals in family court therapeutic interventions. The appropriateness of such an arrangement is questionable at best, and—" "Mr. Davidson, are you arguing that helping this child heal is inappropriate?" Judge Morrison's tone could have frozen water. "Of course not, Your Honor, but—" "Then I suggest you trust that I am acting in the best interests of the child, which is, after all, the primary consideration in any custody matter." She turned to her clerk. "Please note for the record that I am ordering the following. First, Ms. Chen will engage the services of a licensed child psychologist specializing in early childhood trauma within 1 week. Second, said psychologist will develop a comprehensive treatment plan that includes twice-weekly traditional therapy sessions." Judge Morrison paused, making direct eye contact with Davidson. "Third, and this is non-negotiable, Officer Martinez and Rex will participate in supplemental sessions designed to help Emma feel safe enough to engage in the therapeutic process. Officer Martinez has already received approval from the Denver police chief for this arrangement." Sarah felt tears streaming down her face again, but these were tears of relief and gratitude. Someone with power was finally fighting for her daughter. "Fourth," the judge continued, "both parties will maintain the current custody arrangement. Emma remains with her mother, and there will be no visitation with the father pending the outcome of his criminal trial. Fifth, we will reconvene in exactly 60 days to assess Emma's progress and make a final custody determination." Davidson stood again, his voice tight. "Your Honor, my clients will be filing an immediate appeal of this decision. This is judicial activism at its worst, imposing experimental therapy on a child without proper. File whatever you like, Mr. Davidson, Judge Morrison said coolly. But until an appellate court overturns my decision, my order stands, and I suggest you inform your clients that opposing therapeutic intervention for their granddaughter might not reflect well on their suitability as guardians. The attorney sat down, his jaw clenched. He was beaten, at least for now, and he knew it. Judge Morrison's expression softened as she looked at Sarah. Ms. Chen, I need you to understand the responsibility you're accepting. You will ensure Emma attends every therapy session. You will cooperate fully with the therapist's recommendations. You will maintain detailed records of Emma's progress. And if, at the end of 60 days, there has been insufficient improvement, I will have to consider other custody arrangements. Do you understand? Yes, Your Honor, Sarah said, her voice steady despite her emotions. I'll do everything you've asked, everything. Good, now I have some calls to make. Judge Morrison looked at Officer Martinez. Officer, I need recommendations for child psychologists who might be open to this unconventional approach, preferably someone who has experience with animal-assisted therapy or at least an open mind about it. Martinez nodded. I know someone, Your Honor, Dr. Patricia Williams. She works at the Children's Advocacy Center where Rex and I have done several cases. She's a licensed clinical psychologist, specializes in childhood PTSD, and she's actually been advocating for more integration of therapy animals into traditional treatment protocols. Perfect. Get me her contact information. I'll reach out to her personally today. Judge Morrison made a note. This court is adjourned. We'll reconvene in 60 days on April 8th at 9 a.m. As the gavel fell, Emma looked up from her book. Is Rex leaving? She asked, her voice small and worried. Officer Martinez knelt beside her, his voice gentle. Rex and I have to go back to work now, Emma, but we're going to see you again very soon. Is that okay? Emma's lower lip trembled. When? Sarah knelt beside her daughter, brushing hair from her face. Soon, baby. The nice judge said Rex is going to help you feel better. You'll get to see him lots of times. Promise? Emma asked, looking between her mother and Officer Martinez. I promise, Martinez said solemnly. He held out his pinky finger, and after a moment's hesitation, Emma hooked her tiny pinky around his. A pinky promise is the most serious kind of promise there is. Emma managed a small smile, then turned to Rex and threw her arms around his neck one more time. Bye, Rex. See you soon. The German shepherd's tail wagged gently, and he touched his nose to Emma's cheek in what could only be described as a kiss. 3 days later, Sarah sat in the waiting room of Dr. Patricia Williams' office, Emma pressed against her side. The office was designed to be child-friendly, with colorful murals on the walls and bins of toys scattered around. But Emma showed no interest in any of it. Her momentary breakthrough in the courtroom had faded somewhat, replaced by her usual withdrawn anxiety. Dr. Williams emerged from her office, a woman in her early 40s with kind eyes and an immediate warmth that Sarah appreciated. You must be Sarah and Emma. Please come in. The therapy room was different from the others Emma had been to. There were the usual elements, a sandbox for play therapy, art supplies, comfortable seating, but there was also a large dog bed in the corner and several framed photos of dogs on the walls. Emma, Dr. Williams said, settling into a chair at the child's eye level, Judge Morrison told me about your new friend Rex. I've actually worked with Rex before. He's a very special dog. Emma's eyes flickered with interest for the first time since entering the office. Rex and Officer Martinez are going to come visit us sometimes while you and I talk, Dr. Williams continued. But even when Rex isn't here, we're going to work on helping you feel as safe as you did when you were with him. Does that sound okay? Emma didn't respond verbally, but she nodded. A small gesture, but more engagement than she'd shown with any other therapist. Over the next hour, Dr. Williams conducted her initial assessment with remarkable skill. She didn't push Emma to talk about the trauma. Instead, she asked about Emma's favorite colors, her favorite foods, what she liked to do before bedtime. Gradually, she introduced more substantive questions, always gauging Emma's comfort level, never pushing too hard. After the session, while Emma played with blocks in the waiting room under the supervision of Dr. Williams' assistant, the psychologist sat down with Sarah. "Your daughter has severe post-traumatic stress disorder, as you know," Dr. Williams said gently. "What happened with Rex in that courtroom was significant, but I need you to understand that it wasn't magic. Emma felt safe enough with Rex to let her guard down momentarily. My job is to help her feel that safe consistently, so she can process what happened and learn to trust the world again." "How long will it take?" Sarah asked, the question that had been haunting her for months. "There's no definitive timeline with childhood trauma," Dr. Williams answered honestly. "But I can tell you this. Emma's response to Rex tells me that her capacity for trust and connection isn't broken, just damaged. That's actually very hopeful. Some children who have experienced what Emma has completely shut down. Emma is still capable of forming bonds, of feeling safe. We just need to rebuild that capacity step by step." She pulled out a treatment plan she'd been working on since Judge Morrison had called. "I'm proposing twice-weekly sessions with me, traditional trauma-focused cognitive behavioral therapy adapted for her age. Once a week, Officer Martinez and Rex will join us for the second half of the session. The other session will be just Emma and me, working on building our therapeutic relationship." "And you really think this will work?" Sarah asked, desperate for reassurance. Dr. Williams smiled. "I think Emma has already shown us what she needs. She needs to feel safe before she can heal. Rex gave her that feeling. Now we build on it, extend it, help her find that safety within herself and in her relationship with you. It won't be easy and there will be setbacks. But yes, Sarah, I believe we can help your daughter find her way back." That evening, as Sarah tucked Emma into bed, her daughter spoke unprompted for the first time in months during their bedtime routine. "Mommy, when do I see Rex again?" "In 4 days, baby. The nice doctor said Rex will come visit you." Emma was quiet for a moment, then whispered, "Rex makes the scary go away." Sarah's heart broke and soared at the same time. "I know, sweetheart, and we're going to help you make the scary go away even when Rex isn't there. Okay?" "Okay, Mommy." It was the first night in 6 months that Emma fell asleep without crying. And though she still had a nightmare around 2 a.m., she let Sarah comfort her instead of pulling away, and she fell back asleep relatively quickly. It was a small victory, but after months of nothing but defeats, Sarah would take it. The bridge to healing had been built. Now came the hard work of crossing it. 8 weeks later, Courtroom 4B was once again filled to capacity, but the atmosphere was entirely different from that first hearing. Word had spread through the Denver legal community about Judge Morrison's unconventional order, and several family law attorneys had quietly slipped into the back rows to observe the outcome. The local news had gotten wind of the story despite Chief Patterson's wishes. Though Judge Morrison had successfully kept Emma's identity protected and cameras out of the courthouse. Sarah Chen sat at the plaintiff's table, but unlike 8 weeks ago, she wasn't trembling. Her shoulders were back, her head held high. The exhausted, desperate woman who had walked into this courtroom 2 months prior had been replaced by someone who had watched her daughter come back to life, piece by precious piece. Emma sat beside her mother in a booster seat, wearing a yellow dress with sunflowers on it, her first time choosing her own outfit in months. She was coloring quietly in a notebook, occasionally looking up to scan the courtroom. When her eyes found Rex sitting beside Officer Martinez near the side entrance, her face lit up with a genuine smile. "Rex," Emma called out, waving enthusiastically. Several spectators smiled at the child's obvious joy. Officer Martinez gave Emma a thumbs up, and Rex's tail thumped against the floor in recognition. The bond between the child and the dog had deepened over 8 weeks of twice-weekly sessions into something beautiful and healing. Judge Morrison entered and everyone rose. As she settled into her seat, she took a moment to observe Emma, really observe her. The transformation was remarkable. This was not the same terrified, mute child who had run across this courtroom 2 months ago. This was a little girl who was finding her way back to herself. "Please be seated," Judge Morrison said. "We're here for the continuation of Chen versus Chen custody matter. I've reviewed the reports submitted by Dr. Patricia Williams, Officer Martinez, and Ms. Chen's caseworker. Before I hear arguments from counsel, I'd like to hear directly from Dr. Williams. Doctor, please approach." Dr. Patricia Williams walked to the witness stand with a thick folder under her arm. After being sworn in, she settled into her seat and opened her documentation. "Dr. Williams," Judge Morrison began, "please describe Emma's condition when you first evaluated her 8 weeks ago." Dr. Williams didn't need to consult her notes for this. Emma presented with severe symptoms of post-traumatic stress disorder. She was selectively mute, speaking only in 1- or 2-word responses when directly questioned. She exhibited hypervigilance, extreme startle responses, and what we call emotional numbing, a flattening of affect that's common in trauma survivors. Her mother reported night terrors 5 to 6 times per week, difficulty with peer relationships, and complete withdrawal from activities she had previously enjoyed. "And what was your prognosis at that time?" "Guarded," Dr. Williams admitted. Emma had already been through several months of traditional therapy with minimal progress. Children who don't respond to initial interventions can sometimes become entrenched in their trauma responses, making treatment increasingly difficult. I was hopeful but realistic about the challenges ahead. Judge Morrison leaned forward. "Please describe the treatment protocol you implemented." "We used a multimodal approach," Dr. Williams explained. "Twice-weekly sessions with me using trauma-focused cognitive behavioral therapy adapted for early childhood. These sessions involved play therapy, art therapy, and gradual exposure techniques to help Emma process her traumatic memories in age-appropriate ways." She pulled out a series of drawings from her folder. "These are Emma's drawings from our first week. You can see the dark colors, the chaotic imagery, the figures with no faces or features. This is typical of how traumatized children express their internal state, confused, frightening, lacking clear identity or safety." Dr. Williams then pulled out more recent drawings. The contrast was startling. Bright colors, recognizable figures, a house with a sun overhead and flowers in the yard, and prominently featured in several drawings, a large German shepherd with a smiling little girl beside it. "These are from last week," she continued. "The progression tells a story of a child who is regaining her sense of safety, her ability to envision positive experiences, her connection to joy." "And Officer Martinez's participation," Judge Morrison prompted. "Critical," Dr. Williams said emphatically. "Twice a week, Officer Martinez and Rex joined us for the second half of our sessions. Emma's anxiety levels dropped measurably when Rex entered the room. With Rex present, she was able to discuss difficult topics that she completely shut down about in his absence." She consulted her notes now. By week 3, Emma began speaking in full sentences during therapy, but only with Rex in the room. By week 5, she was maintaining that verbal communication even when Rex wasn't present. By week 7, she had her first full night without nightmares. And as of our session yesterday, Emma has been nightmare-free for 9 consecutive nights. Sarah wiped tears from her eyes as she listened to the clinical validation of what she'd been witnessing at home. Her daughter's gradual return to the child she had been before trauma shattered her world. "Dr. Williams, in your professional opinion, what role did Rex play in Emma's recovery?" Judge Morrison asked. The psychologist chose her words carefully. "Rex provided what I call a secure base. A non-judgmental, consistent, safe presence that allowed Emma to begin rebuilding her capacity for trust. Dogs don't have hidden agendas, they don't lie, they don't suddenly become violent. For Emma, whose trust in humans had been profoundly damaged, Rex was the perfect bridge back to connection. She continued, "Once Emma could trust Rex, we could work on extending that trust, first to Officer Martinez, then to me, then back to her mother in a deeper way, and gradually to other safe adults in her life." Rex didn't cure Emma's PTSD, but he gave her a safe enough foundation to begin the healing process. Attorney Davidson rose for cross-examination, but his heart clearly wasn't in it. "Dr. Williams, is Emma fully recovered?" "No," Dr. Williams answered honestly. "Emma has made remarkable progress, but PTSD recovery is a long-term process. She'll likely need ongoing therapy for several more months, possibly longer. She may always have triggers or difficult moments related to her trauma. So she still has significant mental health challenges. She has a diagnosed condition that requires continued professional support, yes, but the trajectory of her recovery is excellent. With continued therapy and a stable, loving home environment, I'm optimistic about her long-term prognosis." Davidson sat down, recognizing he had nothing to gain from further questioning. Judge Morrison then called Officer Martinez to testify. The officer approached the stand, his dress uniform crisp and professional. After being sworn in, he sat with the comfortable confidence of someone who had testified many times before, though never in quite these circumstances. "Officer Martinez, please describe your observations of Emma's progress over these 8 weeks." Martinez's face softened as he spoke. "Your Honor, the first time Emma interacted with Rex in this courtroom, it was profound but fragile, like watching ice begin to crack after a long winter. Over the past 8 weeks, I've watched that crack become a complete thaw." He pulled out a small notebook. "I've kept detailed logs of every session. In week 1, Emma would only interact with Rex, ignoring Dr. Williams and me completely. By week 2, she started making eye contact with me when I spoke to her. Week 3, she asked me questions about Rex, what he eats, where he sleeps, whether he has dog friends." The officer's voice grew warmer with emotion. "By week 4, she was asking me about my job, whether being a police officer was scary, whether I helped keep people safe. These might seem like simple questions, but for a child whose last interaction with police was watching them arrest her father while he made violent threats, these questions represented enormous progress in rebuilding her sense that authority figures can be protectors, not threats." "Week 6 was a breakthrough," Martinez continued. "Emma asked if she could teach Rex a trick. Dr. Williams and I agreed, and Emma worked with Rex on high five for 3 sessions. When Rex finally did it successfully, Emma laughed so hard she fell over. It was pure, uninhibited joy, the kind you can't fake, can't force, can't manufacture through therapy alone." He looked directly at Judge Morrison. "Last week, Emma told me she wants to be a police officer when she grows up so she can help scared kids with a police dog, just like Rex helped her. Your Honor, this is a child who is not just healing. She's finding purpose in her pain. She's transforming her trauma into a desire to help others." Sarah was crying openly now, as were several spectators in the courtroom gallery. Even the court reporter had to dab at her eyes. Judge Morrison called for a brief recess, then asked to see Emma in her chambers with Sarah, Dr. Williams, and a child advocate present. In the less formal setting of the judge's office, Emma sat in a child-sized chair and looked around with curiosity rather than fear. "Emma," Judge Morrison said gently, "I'm the judge who helped you get to spend time with Rex. Do you remember?" Emma nodded enthusiastically. "You're the nice judge lady. Rex told me you were nice." Judge Morrison smiled. "Rex told you. How did he tell you that?" "With his eyes," Emma said matter-of-factly, as if this were the most obvious thing in the world. "Rex talks with his eyes and his tail and his ears. You just have to pay attention." The judge's heart melted a little. "Emma, can you tell me how you feel now compared to how you felt before you met Rex?" Emma thought about this seriously, her little face scrunched in concentration. "Before, everything was scary and loud in my head. Even when things were quiet, it was loud inside. Mommy would hug me, but I couldn't feel it because the scary was too big." She looked at her mother, then back at the judge. "But Rex helped make the scared smaller. Dr. Williams says the scared might never go all the way away, but it's getting smaller every day. And when the scared tries to get big again, I think about Rex and how safe he makes me feel, and I remember that feeling even when he's not there." Judge Morrison glanced at Dr. Williams, who nodded approvingly. Emma was articulating complex emotional regulation concepts in her own 3-year-old vocabulary, a sign of genuine therapeutic progress. "Do you feel safe with your mommy?" the judge asked. "Yes," Emma said immediately. "Mommy keeps me safe. She works really hard and she's always tired, but she loves me so much. She tells me every day." "What about your daddy? Do you want to see your daddy?" Emma's face clouded slightly, but she didn't shut down the way she would have 2 months ago. "Daddy made bad choices. That's what Dr. Williams says. He hurt Mommy and scared me really bad. I don't want to see him until he learns to make good choices again." The simplicity and clarity of her answer spoke volumes. This was not a coached response. It was a child who had processed her experience enough to articulate her own boundaries. Judge Morrison had everything she needed to make her ruling. The courtroom settled into expectant silence as Judge Morrison returned to the bench, her black robes flowing behind her with the weight of the decision she was about to render. Emma sat beside her mother, swinging her legs from the booster seat, occasionally glancing back at Rex with a comfort and ease that would have been unthinkable 2 months earlier. Attorney Robert Davidson sat at his table, his expensive briefcase already packed. The fight had gone out of him somewhere around week 4 when his client's own investigator had reported back that Emma was noticeably improved and that opposing the therapy was unlikely to be viewed favorably by any court. The Davidson grandparents sat in the gallery, their faces a mixture of disappointment and grudging acceptance. Judge Morrison adjusted her glasses and looked out over the courtroom. When she spoke, her voice carried the authority of someone who had just witnessed something extraordinary and was determined to ensure its significance wasn't lost. "I have presided over family court matters for 20 years, she began. "I have seen the best and worst of human nature play out in custody disputes, watched families torn apart by violence and addiction and mental illness. I have read thousands of psychological reports, heard testimony from hundreds of experts, and made decisions that have affected countless children's lives." She paused, letting the weight of those words settle over the room. "But I have rarely witnessed a transformation as profound and as thoroughly documented as the one I have seen in Emma Chen over the past 60 days. Sarah gripped Emma's hand, hardly daring to breathe. Dr. Williams' testimony, supported by detailed clinical documentation, demonstrates measurable, significant improvement in Emma's psychological functioning. Officer Martinez's observations provide consistent evidence of a child who has regained her capacity for trust, joy, and emotional regulation. And my own observation of Emma today, a child who walks into this courtroom with confidence, who smiles, who speaks clearly and appropriately about her own needs and feelings, tells me everything I need to know about the effectiveness of her mother's care." Judge Morrison looked directly at Attorney Davidson. "Mr. Davidson, your clients argued that Ms. Chen was unable to provide adequate care for Emma due to limited resources and the child's lack of progress in therapy. The evidence before this court proves exactly the opposite. When presented with an innovative treatment approach, Ms. Chen embraced it fully. She attended every single therapy session, all 16 of them, despite working full-time. She cooperated completely with Dr. Williams' recommendations. She documented Emma's progress meticulously." The judge's voice grew firmer. More importantly, she fought for her daughter when it would have been easier to give up. She advocated for what Emma needed even when that meant participating in an unconventional, unprecedented therapeutic intervention that carried significant risk of failure. That, Mr. Davidson, is the definition of adequate parental care. She turned to the custody paperwork before her. Therefore, I am ruling as follows. Full legal and physical custody of Emma Chen is awarded to her mother, Sarah Chen. The father's parental rights remain suspended pending the outcome of his criminal trial and completion of court-ordered domestic violence treatment. Should he successfully complete treatment and demonstrate sustained behavioral change, supervised visitation may be considered no earlier than 1 year from today's date. Sarah's shoulders shook with silent sobs of relief. Emma looked up at her mother, concerned, then hugged her arm tightly. Furthermore, Judge Morrison continued, I am ordering that Emma continue therapy with Dr. Williams for a minimum of 6 additional months, with sessions continuing at the discretion of Dr. Williams and Ms. Chen. Officer Martinez and Rex's participation in supplemental sessions will continue on a monthly basis for the next 3 months, then on an as-needed basis as determined by Dr. Williams. She looked at Officer Martinez and Rex. Officer Martinez, I want it noted in the record that your dedication and Rex's extraordinary service have been instrumental in this child's recovery. I will be submitting a formal commendation to Chief Patterson, and I am recommending that the Victim Services K-9 program receive increased funding and expansion. Martinez nodded, his throat too tight to speak. Rex, as if sensing the significance of the moment, sat at perfect attention, his tail giving one dignified wag. Judge Morrison wasn't finished. I'm also directing the court administrator to work with the Denver Police Department and the Children's Advocacy Center to develop formal protocols for animal-assisted therapeutic interventions in family court cases. What we have done here was unprecedented, but it shouldn't remain unique. There are other children like Emma who might benefit from this approach. The implications rippled through the courtroom. Judge Morrison was transforming a single case into potential policy change, using Emma's healing as a template for helping other traumatized children. This court is adjourned, Judge Morrison said, bringing down her gavel with finality. Ms. Chen, take your daughter home. Love her, protect her, and continue the excellent work you've been doing. Emma, keep being brave and keep getting stronger. As people began to rise, Emma surprised everyone by slipping off her booster seat and walking directly to the bench. She looked up at Judge Morrison with complete seriousness. Thank you for letting Rex help me, Emma said, her voice clear and strong. You're a very good judge. Judge Morrison, who prided herself on professional composure, felt her eyes misting. You're very welcome, Emma, and you're a very brave girl. Emma then walked to Officer Martinez and Rex. She hugged Rex first, burying her face in his fur the way she had that first day, but this time without fear, only love and gratitude. Then she looked up at Martinez. Officer Jake, can I still see Rex sometimes, even though court is done? Martinez glanced at Judge Morrison, who nodded subtly. I think we can arrange visits, Emma, maybe once a month at the police station. You could see where Rex works, meet some of the other police dogs. Emma's face lit up with pure delight. Really? Other police dogs too? Really? Martinez confirmed, his own smile genuine and warm. Rex would like that. He's gotten pretty attached to you. As if to confirm this, Rex pressed his nose into Emma's hand and gave a soft whine of affection. The story of Emma and Rex didn't end there. It expanded outward in ways no one could have predicted. Within 2 weeks, the Denver Post ran a carefully vetted story about the case, with Emma's identity protected but the essential facts shared. The response was overwhelming. Letters poured into Judge Morrison's chambers from across the country, family court judges asking for information about the protocols, police departments inquiring about Victim Services K-9 training, parents of traumatized children desperate for similar help. The Denver Police Department, recognizing the positive publicity and genuine community benefit, expanded their victim services K-9 program from 1 certified dog to 6 within 4 months. Other Colorado police departments followed suit, and within a year, the state legislature passed funding specifically earmarked for animal-assisted victim services programs. Dr. Patricia Williams was invited to speak at national conferences about trauma-informed therapy incorporating animal assistance. She published a case study on Emma's treatment, with Sarah's permission, that became required reading in several graduate psychology programs. The approach became known informally as the Denver Protocol, though Dr. Williams always insisted on calling it Emma's Protocol, in honor of the brave little girl who had shown them all the way. 6 months after the final court hearing, Sarah Chen received an unexpected call. A national victims advocacy organization wanted to fly her and Emma to Washington, D.C., to testify before a congressional committee considering funding for innovative trauma treatment programs for children. Sarah was terrified of public speaking, but when they asked if Officer Martinez and Rex could accompany them, she agreed. Emma, now 4 years old and thriving in preschool, stood before a room full of legislators and calmly explained how Rex helped make the scared go away. She showed them her drawings, talked about her therapy with Dr. Williams, and answered questions with the unself-conscious honesty of a child who had been through darkness and found her way back to light. The committee members, hardened politicians who'd seen everything, sat in rapt attention. When Emma finished by saying, "Every scared kid should have a Rex to help them be brave," there wasn't a dry eye in the room. The funding bill passed unanimously 3 weeks later. Officer Martinez and Rex continued their regular patrol duties, but their victim services work expanded significantly. They became the model for how police K-9 units could serve their communities beyond traditional law enforcement functions. Martinez started teaching training seminars for other K-9 handlers, sharing what he'd learned from his partnership with Rex and their work with Emma. Rex, who had always been an exceptional police dog, seemed to understand that his purpose had expanded. He continued to excel at his traditional duties, but his true passion became clear during victim services calls. The hardened police dog who could take down suspects and locate contraband became gentle as a lamb when working with traumatized children. A year after the court case concluded, Judge Morrison invited Sarah, Emma, Officer Martinez, Rex, and Dr. Williams to her chambers for an informal gathering. It was Emma's 5th birthday, and the judge had arranged a small celebration. Emma, now a vibrant kindergartner with friends and interests and only occasional nightmares, sat on the floor with Rex, sharing her birthday cupcake with him, the dog-safe version Martinez had thoughtfully brought. She chattered constantly about school, her best friend Sophia, her favorite books, and her determination to become a police officer with dogs who help scared kids. "She talks about it constantly," Sarah told the group, shaking her head with amused exasperation. "Last week she announced she's going to have 6 police dogs when she grows up. I tried to explain that's not exactly how it works, but she's pretty determined." "Never underestimate the determination of someone who's overcome what Emma has," Dr. Williams said, watching the little girl with professional satisfaction and personal affection. Judge Morrison raised her coffee cup in a toast. "To Emma, who taught us all that healing doesn't always look like we expect it to. And to Rex, the very good dog who knew exactly what one little girl needed." "To Emma and Rex," they chorused, even Emma joining in with her juice box held high. As the sun set over Denver that evening, casting golden light through Judge Morrison's chamber windows, the group shared stories and laughter. Emma sat contentedly beside Rex, one small hand resting on his fur, secure in the knowledge that she was safe, loved, and surrounded by people who had fought for her healing. The little girl who had run across a courtroom in terror, seeking refuge in a police dog's presence, had become a symbol of hope for traumatized children everywhere. Her story sparked a movement that would help thousands of other children find their way back from trauma. And it all started with a judge who was wise enough to pause, a mother who never gave up, a police officer and his remarkable dog who answered a call to serve in a new way, and a therapist who believed in innovative approaches to healing. But most of all, it started with a 3-year-old girl who, despite everything she'd endured, still had the courage to reach out her hand toward hope, even when hope came in the unexpected form of a 70-pound German Shepherd police dog. Emma's scare had gotten smaller, just like she'd told Judge Morrison it would, and in its place grew strength, resilience, and a determination to help other children find their own Rex, their own bridge back to safety, trust, and joy. The legacy of that moment when Judge Morrison paused would continue to ripple outward for years to come, touching lives and changing systems, proving that sometimes the most powerful interventions come not from textbooks or protocols, but from paying attention to what a child needs and having the courage to provide it, even when it means breaking every rule in the book. The end.